So welcome, Anna. It's great to have you with us. This is our first series of our Leadership Stories podcast for Leading to Change. When we went out to our audience and asked who would they like to hear from, we had a lovely range of responses, but one that kept coming back was, we'd like to hear from senior leaders. And so this podcast is designed to show the real people behind the role, demystify maybe some of what people think a chief exec or a chief officer or a director role would look like. So we're going to talk a little bit about your career, how you got here. Did you always want to be a chief exec? I never think so. And then we'll talk a little bit about what good leadership looks like for you. How is it that you want to be showing up as a leader? Maybe talk about some of the challenges you've had, who's inspired you as a leader. And then the question that we've come to with all of our guests on this podcast has been, what do you think is the biggest leadership challenge facing us at this time? So really pleased you're able to join us today. So your role, Anna, is the Chief Executive of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, known as SCVO. Tell us a little bit about your career journey and what brought you there.
Yeah, so it's been quite a long and winding path in a way, because I certainly didn't start out thinking I would be doing anything like this. If I just do kind of chronologically potted history, so went to school in Inverness High School, went to Edinburgh University to study history of art, and turns out there's not lots of jobs in history of art unless you've got a dad in Sotheby's or something, which I clearly didn't. So I then was unemployed for 6 months, but I got a job in Lothian Regional Council as a trainee in HR. It was personnel in those days and admin. And the reason I went for that job was because my stepmother worked in the region and told me that was the department that had the best parties. So, and they did have really, really good parties.
Is this going to be a theme that we notice throughout your career?
But what I didn't expect was that the HR part of it, personnel, as I say in those days, really, really interested me. I did it because apparently you need admin experience to be a curator. I kind of thought actually knowing about the art was more important, but turns out you need admin experience. So that was my kind of way in. But I just loved getting into the HR stuff, and I really liked working for the council, and I kind of at that point decided I wanted to work in public services. So from there, I kind of continued in HR and local government, eventually in Midlothian Council as an employee relations manager after local government reorganisation. And then I went to COSLA, into the employers function in COSLA. So first week in the job, I had all the nursery nurses in Scotland out on strike, so that was interesting. So it was a really interesting experience, teachers' pay negotiations, all of that. But then the chief exec at the time did a reorganisation, and I moved into children and young people's policy work. So still did a bit on the employer side, but mainly children and young people. So education, children's social work, youth justice, that kind of thing. Absolutely loved it. And from there I was seconded into Scottish Government to be a czar for looked after children. I was in the Times Ed as a czar. My mother was so chuffed. But my colleagues in COSLA at the time told me that czars end up shot against a wall. So, but I didn't. I stayed there and enjoyed that job. So really kick-started the kind of the work that's ongoing just now about corporate parenting and what's become the promise. And that has been a recurrent theme for me. Something I really cared about and care about even now. And then I had been seconded in there for 3 years and was thinking, what am I going to do next? So I applied to be the Chief Exec of the Scottish Social Services Council and got that, and was there for nearly 9 years. And so then that was about nearly 6 years ago, when I'd been there for that length of time. And I was thinking, in my mid-50s, I need one more big job before I retire. What's it going to be? I want a real challenge. So when this job came up at SCVO, I applied for that, wanting a real challenge. And it has been, and it's been so interesting. So yeah, I have kind of gate-crashed other people's professions for my entire life. And it's been great. I've never had a plan. I've always just thought, that looks interesting. And done that, and it has so far only one job which I haven't mentioned, which I hated with a passion, and I was only in it for a year.
Okay.
Yeah. I got out of it quick.
So did you ever think you would be leading an organisation as a chief exec or chief officer?
I'd never thought about that. I'm not really a very statusy person. I quite like being in charge, it turns out, but I had never really thought I would be that person because I've never had a plan. I've never really thought where am I going to be next. No, not really. Though I did when I was still within Scottish Government. A friend of mine was training to do psychometric testing, and she did a practice on me, and one of the results that came out of it was if this person isn't already a chief executive, they should be.
Oh.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. So it didn't make me do it, but it made me feel a bit more confident.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what have been the key drivers in terms of the decisions you've made about going to different roles?
I think it's about what's right at the time and what really interests you. When I went to the SSC, that was when the organisation was created. I had gone to, because I worked in HR in the council at the time, I'd gone to see a launch event where Carol, that was the chief exec at the time, talked about it. And I said to one of my colleagues, I would like her job. I never thought I would actually do it, but I really liked that because it was just so interesting, and an organisation that was functioning really well. It needed a bit of improvement, but not anything, didn't need radical change. So I could learn on the job while I was there and know I was doing something really important. I think everything I've done has had a new challenge, but I can see the difference it's making. So like moving into a national role when I went to COSLA, that was fascinating. Having done those roles within a council, you're still negotiating with trade unions, but in a very different context.
And has there been any part of your journey that surprised you?
Yeah, yes. I suppose I'm still surprised that I'm not a curator in an art gallery somewhere, because that's kind of where I thought I was going when I did my degree. But then I did study Celtic art and architecture and Islamic art and architecture, so that's pretty niche. There's not lots of jobs in that. So yeah, and I think almost everything's a surprise, because I thought, I never thought I would do that. But no, I think it's always a bit of a surprise, but there's probably nothing that was like really dramatic.
And what is it that drives you in a role? What is it that kind of draws you to a role?
So the purpose of the organisation, and that's really, really important to me, and has got more and more important as I've got older. I mean, to be honest, the purpose of the organisation, my first job, was architectural services in the council. I wasn't really driven by building schools and fire stations, but I got into it. I got interested in helping people do that. But it's people really, I'm really fascinated by people. So when I came down to university, I did history of art. I was the only person in my year that went to a state school. I was the only one that wasn't in Who's Who. And they'd all gone to kind of Eton and Rodine and none of your Heriots or any of that stuff. And I was really intrigued by those people. And it was that's when I learned to pretend I was confident, or to be confident.
Well, whichever's true, that's it. Whichever one of those is true.
Because I kind of thought, well, just because you've paid for your education doesn't mean to say that I'm any lesser than you. And I also realised I knew far more about, Caravaggio or whatever I was doing at the time than they did. So I think, but I was really intrigued by them. And I think that stayed with me. So I'm really just intrigued by people. So if somebody is hostile to me or behaves in a way that I'm not expecting, I don't think, what the hell's that about? I think, I wonder where that's coming from. And I try to hold on to that. There's some notable exceptions where you can't help just thinking, swear word. But mainly I just think, that's interesting.
So that curiosity is core for you.
Oh, yeah.
And does that extend beyond the people? Is that into the opportunities? Is that into challenges? Are you a curious person by nature?
I am a very curious person by nature. And what really, the more I'm in this kind of leadership role, the more curious I am about, alongside people, because that'll never go, is systems and why they do and don't work. And I've always been interested in that. I've always kind of looked beyond just the immediate situation. And I'm really intrigued by how we've got, wherever I am, there's lots of really good words and really good intentions and people that really want to do the right thing. And most people agreed on what that right thing might be. It still didn't happen. So why does it not happen? And that really intrigues me.
And what have the reasons been? What have you discovered over the years? Where's that curiosity taken you?
I think it's taken me into getting involved in stuff that some of my colleagues in every job have probably thought, what's she doing that for? And I think, well, because I'm dead interested in it, and that's probably not the best reason if you haven't got a lot of time. So it's taken me into participating in various groups or writing things and seeing what the reaction's going to be, because I really want to I want to make a difference. I know that sounds a bit Miss World, but I do actually want things to be better. I want Scotland to be the place I know it can be. And you have to think that if we just got past that bit, if we could just get to there, what is it that's not getting us there? And I did say a while back that I wasn't sitting on any more working groups that were basically talking about utopia, because I'm so fed up. This is when you've been around as long as I have. I'm fed up and invited onto groups to redefine the problem. Let's talk about what the situation is. Let's map and scope that. Nope, we've mapped and scoped everything. We've looked into it. We've defined the problem. We've redefined the problem. Let's just do all the things that have been recommended. Let's just do it.
It's interesting you say that, because one of these other conversations we've had, when I asked if there was one thing you'd like to see change, what would it be? And the response was, I wish we would stop admiring the problem.
Absolutely. One of my friends calls it polishing the problem.
Polishing the problem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a great phrase.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great phrase. What does good leadership look like, and how is it that you want to be showing up as a leader?
Well, I think that it's really interesting, because the height of the pandemic really showed me was what I've always talked about was true, is that what a good leader is different in different situations. So I'm naturally a really consensual person. My strengths are empathy and strategic thinking and collaboration. When those strengths go into overdrive, that can be a problem. But at the time when it was lockdown, basically, you immediately had to go, right, I'm in charge here. And this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. And, you can keep your opinions to yourself until we've moved on. So, and I mean, that didn't last long, but it was one of those kind of moments where you really had to change direction. What I think is really sad is that we learned so much in that time about how people work and how people can work together across the system. And we've not kept it. We have gone back. And I think that's such a shame, because people said so much, especially about 2021. Oh, this is when we're working across boundaries and blah, blah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
No, we've just gone back to silos again.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because although it was a very difficult time, and there was a lot of command and control brought back into play, and in some cases appropriately so, in some cases it was held on to maybe a little longer than we would have liked to have seen. There was that we've spoken to many leading to change and wider with conversations we've had at community events, for example, where there was a freedom given, that kind of collective leadership in action. Here's your boundaries, go and do what you need to do. And a kind of almost an energised, even though tired. And then as time's gone on, that's been taken back. The engagement we've had in leading to change, especially through our community events, we hear great stories of during that time, although it was hard, there was real freedom given. Here's your boundary, go and do what needs to be done. So collective leadership in action. And although people were tired, they were energised by having that empowerment and that chance to do that. But now as time has gone on, that has been pulled back, and things that were put in place have maybe been taken away again and almost unrecognised as that was a good thing we should have kept, and a frustration with that. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is because we lost some of that, the procedures that we've been familiar with over the years, which are there for good reason, but that are really risk averse. They've all, we've got a system that's been designed to deal with the one disaster that might happen, instead of enabling people to do the right thing. So there's that, but also I think some people, particularly colleagues in Scottish Government, probably quite enjoyed having that power and went into that place of being able to say, we want this, 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 this and this, even though they didn't have a Scooby about what actually needed to be done, because that's not their skill set and not their role. They're still in that trying to deliver everything or to control, being the boss of them kind of role. And there's definitely some culture around just now where people are not sticking to their lanes across the system. There's a bit of kind of everybody's trying to show that they're delivering things. And actually, if your role, if you're in Scottish Government, your role is policy, law and money. They do that really well. That's what you need to do. You don't need to deliver it, because there's organisations like mine and yours who delivers things. So and there's many other organisations that deliver things that we can contribute to strategy and to the legislation and all the rest of it. So it's something about appreciate. Maybe that's what it is actually. It's at that during the pandemic, people appreciated the expertise that could be brought to the table. So kind of everyone got around a virtual table and went, right, you're good at this, you're good at that, you're good at that. You know these people, you know how to reach those people. So we'll pool our kind of expertise and our contacts, and nobody thought about money initially, and that's a luxury that will never be repeated. We can't do that whole we don't think about money, So, but that respect for people's expertise seems to have gone. It's back to kind of, oh, well, you're just a charity, you're not going to really know about that, or or they're just, or NHS, they think they know all this, the council, they think they know. Do you know what I mean? We've gone back to that instead of it being really valuing the expertise that people brought, even though we saw it not very long ago.
So it feels like lessons lost rather than lessons learned.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there will be some, obviously we've all learned about blended working and things like that, and I think that's good, and much more embracing of digital. I think that's great, but yeah, much more lost than learned, I think.
So what is it as a leader in that space that you want to bring in your leadership approach, the way that you're showing up?
Yeah, so I kind of want to, I think my strengths that I talked about, the kind of empathy, strategic thinking and collaboration, I think those are my strengths. But I also think being authentic, and authentic is started to be a cliche, which is a bit of a shame. But I do think it's really important for people to know that you're just a human being, you're just a normal person, and that we all have a thing to contribute. So that's one of my big things, is that everybody should be valued. Whatever you do, I don't have a thing of, well, they're just a receptionist. I never would think like that. I think you value everybody's contribution because it's really important. So I bring that. I do absolutely respect people and stick with it and value people's expertise, but I also want people to think, just if you're a chief exec, doesn't mean to say that you never get ill, or you never have to go and pick up a sick child, or you never, my daughters are in their 20s, so I'm not doing that anymore, but but that kind of thing. You need to know that we're all the same, really.
All people.
Yeah, exactly.
People. So we're into that kind of humility space, aren't we? The understanding that whatever the role, whatever the level, whatever the organisation as well, in a cross-sector view and a system view, we are all people trying to do, wanting to do a good job with good outcomes.
Absolutely.
For others. Is there anyone particular that has inspired you, if we're thinking about that kind of leadership in this space?
Yeah, so I would say two people. One would be the person who was my first boss when I went to work in the council, Lorraine, who saw something in me that wasn't probably visible to a lot of other people, because it was quite kind of just, what does that an interview? What do I do? I'd only been an usherette and worked in Debenhams. I'd never had another kind of job before that. So yeah, it was like, I've got a pencil and a paper and a typewriter. What do I do with all those things? But so she really believed in me, and I'm still friendly with her. And she had overcome so many barriers in her life to be where she was, and she'd done really things that really got me for it. Like, she'd run off to Paris in the back of a motorbike in 1968 and stuff like that. So yeah, that that's like, it's amazing. But a really fabulous person and really good HR manager. So I learned so much from her, and just lovely. And the other person would be Megan, who works for Who Cares Scotland. She was on their board as the vice chair when I was on their board as a care experienced young person. And she, again, had lots of things that she had to overcome in her life, but absolutely fantastic leader, really amazing. And the fact that she could contribute what she did as the vice chair, and yet be dealing with all the things she was dealing with in her life, just still fills me with awe. I think she's amazing.
That's great. And so, are there any key characteristics that you see in common for those two that you think that's really different, that really makes an impact on others around you?
Well, I think both of them, that authenticity thing and being yourself and not taking any nonsense from people, but in a really nice way. Nice is too soft, in a respectful way, really holding on to their beliefs and being passionate about what they do and who they are, like with values as people, really strongly values-led people, both of them.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because it's been a common theme that's come through from all of these conversations that we're having. The importance of values and of your own personal values. And if we're talking in an organisation, the actual values rather than the ones on the website or the ones that are laminated on the wall.
Yeah.
And that sense of purpose that comes through that. What if there are people who are in roles at the moment who are watching this and feel that they're in a space where it's hard to articulate those, or it doesn't always feel safe to articulate those? How can people be bold or be more courageous about standing up for what is important to them without feeling that it either has to be a big argument or they have to keep silent? How do we get that space in the middle?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. If I had an answer to that, I would have written a book about it. So I don't really. But I think there is that thing where people have to live their values, and I think you really need to hold on to that. But it's back to what I said earlier on about purpose. It's quite hard to have, all those things like integrity and, transparency and those kind of values, because that should be just how you how you operate as an organisation. But that sense of purpose, of what you really believe in, you need to hold. So when you're doing something that's really difficult, like for example, a restructuring in an organisation, and your empathy's in overload, and you're thinking, oh, this is people's lives and it's really hard. The purpose of the organisation, the purpose of what you're there for, you have to hold on to that, I think. And that will then get you through it. And you have to be aligned with that as a human being. So I think aside from not getting on with your line manager, misalignment with purpose is one of the most common reasons for leaving a job. And actually, I think that's right. I don't mean you shouldn't try and change things, but if you find yourself in an organisation that's got completely different values to you, take your expertise elsewhere.
The impact of being somewhere where you either feel you can't or shouldn't share your values because they're not aligned with the organisation or it's not safe to, that has a really big impact on an individual, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How would we see that showing up for someone?
I think that impacts on people's mental health, and then also impacts on their physical health. And people will but they might become aggressive, they might become frightened or whatever. You won't know. It's different for different people. I think you just have to, and that's where really being interested in people helps with that, because you can kind of spot signs and think, right, I wonder what's going on there. And if you keep asking people questions, if they feel people that feel able to share stuff with me, so that's good. If you're working with people you can't share with, then do try what you can do to change it. But I really think it's that organisation's loss.
So we're coming back to relationships, aren't we? Being able to build relationships. And that takes trust and time and curiosity, doesn't it? We've got Edgar Schein, Humble Inquiry, sitting over there, and this idea of listen expecting to hear something you didn't know already.
Yeah.
I mean, how often do we actually do that? We often ask a question assuming we know the answer in advance, don't we? But having those conversations with everybody around, almost in passing as part of the way we have conversations, to be able to understand when people are doing well what it looks like, so that if they're not, we can also be there and spot and support that. Thinking of that, what's the toughest leadership challenge you've had to deal with personally? One that you're willing to share with us here.
Yeah, so I think probably first coming into SCVO and needing to restructure the organisation and really change how it was working. In purely numerical terms, we had 5 directors and a deputy chief exec for an organisation of 90 odd staff, so that was completely unsustainable. But there were other kind of cultural things where the organisation kind of worked very much in silos, and there was a whole lot of cultural stuff that needed to change. The really encouraging thing for me was that everybody I spoke to really wanted things to change, and lots of people had ideas. They just hadn't been able to do things with their ideas. So for me, there was very few people that I was thinking, okay. I was like, wow, that's brilliant. Why have you not done that? Well, we kind of did it a bit under the radar. So a bit of just feeling there was untapped sort of passion and expertise and knowledge that was there that we just needed to harness. But yeah, there was it was a difficult time they'd been through a really difficult time. So just doing the actual restructure alongside a massive programme of culture change was has been pretty tough. And then straight into a pandemic.
So what did you have to bring yourself into that space in order to look after yourself and your own well-being as you're going through that process?
So really courage and honesty with people, and I was very open and honest with people, and also just my own personal networks. So I found in this job, as I did in my previous role at the SSC, that my kind of counterparts in the other bits of the UK and in Ireland are my kind of natural peers, and so lots of contact with them, lots of making friendships and alliances there. I suppose that really came to the fore in lockdown with in this job, because we went from meeting quarterly or having the odd WhatsApp message on a whatever to meeting every Friday at 4:00 online to talk about work.
It's like a shared check-in.
Yes.
One of the things that we have heard from those in senior roles and those who have thought about it and are not sure about stepping up to them is that role of a chief exec, or whatever the role at the top of that leadership pyramid is in your organisation, can be a very isolated role.
Yeah.
Most other roles, you will have peers or you will have a team, whereas right in that particular top of that little pyramid, it can feel quite lonely. So what difference has it made to you having that peer network available?
A massive difference, absolutely massive. I mean, I think especially in the pandemic, as I said, but also especially when I was first in my role at SSC, the first time I'd been a chief executive, because I had, there's the loneliness thing, but there's also the thing that you're kind of het. So I kept sort of saying to people things like, wouldn't it be interesting if we did this? Or I wonder what would happen if we did this? Or maybe we should do this. And then they'd go away and do it. And I'd be like, what? I need somebody to... I'd be thinking, what on earth are they doing that for? Or they would be thinking, oh, that's really stupid, but didn't want to say. And I had to say, no, you need to tell me. You need to have a conversation, not just do what I say. So that took me about 6 months to work that out. But yeah, so there's that, but also that then thinking you're not everybody's pal. You can't really go to the Christmas night out and throw up in the ladies' toilets or whatever. You have to, you do have to actually own the role, as somebody described it to me, and that you can do that with people who are in similar roles. It's actually helpful when it's the people in the 5 nations, because you're not always going to see them in a bump into them in a meeting, or always in a context. It's a more sporadic thing, and it's definitely a peer group.
It's back to that. What's okay and where do you draw the line? What's okay to be the same as everybody else?
Yeah.
And where do you have to draw the line? Because you are, as one of our earlier guests mentioned, you're actually the adult.
Yeah.
They'd said, I keep turning around expecting to see the adult who's actually looking after everything. You're like, oh, it's me. So how do you find that line where you go, it's okay to be laughing and joking about this, but actually you need to still give people that sense of security that you are holding everything.
Absolutely. And that, again, I don't want to harp on about lockdown, but that was a time where you really had, even though inside you're thinking, I've never dealt with anything like this before, neither had anyone in the world, but, not dealt with this before. Actually a wee bit exciting as well as very scary. But how did you present that air of calm? And that, the colleagues within the organisation were very much part of that as well. I think you just have to find what's right at the time. But it is, see, I don't approve of that whole thing, I'm the adult, because I think one of the things we've been doing in our kind of culture change work has been having adult to adult conversations, and I find it really difficult. What's one of the things I find really difficult is when people won't accept that they are actually adults and they want you to fix everything for them, or they want management to fix everything, or they want, the organisation, whoever that is, to fix everything. I think there's something about helping people, encouraging people, just creating the conditions where everyone steps into the adult role. But I totally get the sentiment of it. It's quite funny when you go, it's been het. That's what I would describe it as, when you go, well, there's nobody to moan about. We're going to moan about. I am them.
They're all moaning about me.
What done it? No, that was me.
What then do you think, with that, what we've been talking about so far in that context, what do you think is the biggest leadership challenge that we share at this time?
Yeah, so I think that dealing with constant uncertainty and the pace of change, and that kind of always been a bit in crisis mode, but that we can't keep that up. We need to and there's a lot of talk about, how do we deal with perma-crisis and everything. I don't think that's just an interesting phenomenon of the moment. I don't think that's going to last. I think we have to kind of look at finding some sort of equilibrium and helping people deal with change and deal with ambiguity. Some people really find ambiguity challenging. I think it's dead interesting, but a lot of people want so much certainty, especially after the last few years, that we've got very different expectations of from our colleagues, really, in our organisations, but also in broader kind of society. There's a kind of need for certainty, I think, that's perfectly understandable. So I think that's a challenge. And I do think dealing with ambiguity, dealing with that fast pace of change, I mean, there's obviously, you could just say having no money, but that's really obvious. The public services are skint. The voluntary sector is even more skint than it's ever been before, when that's saying something. But that's too obvious. That's always a challenge.
Do you think there's a kind of a hangover? I don't want to use the word trauma because I don't want to use it in the wrong place, but this kind of collective, the impact on us as a collective of, we just need something a bit more stable now. We've been through this and we need time to let everything settle. Yeah. We can't just go straight into more uncertainty. Where can we help as leaders, regardless of your level? Where do you think how do you think we can help people gain a sense of that? Because, we've come up with a couple of models by accident almost in these conversations, but we think of this circle of control, circle of influence, and what is out with that. How do we help those that are working with us and around us? Is it a different way of looking at things? Is it where you focus? How do we offer ambiguity? I hate to say it, but in a VUCA world, we're back to that, aren't we, as well?
Well, I think you need to work with where people are. I feel like I'm talking like I'm just using cliches, but anyway, I think we need to think about the individual as an individual and what will work for them. We can't just have one leadership style or one management style because they're quite different that just fits everybody. We have to really think about this person. Why are they feeling like that? What can we do? How much of it is actually anything to do with me or the organisation, and how much of it we just need to accept that they're going through a thing and they need to be allowed to go through the thing. Because not everything can be fixed by an organisation or an individual leader or manager. But it's been really mindful of people's challenges and people's different styles and what works for them. And I think people like boundaries, they like clarity, and they really like freedom and empowerment, but they like that to be within boundaries, would be my observation after having been working since 1987.
We're back to relationships, aren't we?
Yeah, everything's about relationships. The whole world is about relationships.
We're back to knowing the people around you.
Yeah.
And that takes us back to an early step that you gave us, which was being curious and being interested in people and what's going on for them and how they are doing. And that requires us to get to know the people around us, doesn't it? I'm interested what you say there about people like empowerment within boundaries. Yeah. How well do you think leaders across our sector are able to provide the right boundaries to allow people that balance? And that's not coming down on leaders as a whole, or just, are we practiced? Have we spent time thinking about how we get that balance right, or do we tend to go with it's all or nothing? Sometimes it's you can do anything, and sometimes it's you can't do anything at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never thought about that. I think there's more of that nowadays than there was when I first started working, when there was an expectation you would be told what to do in your job, and actually you really shouldn't be thinking or saying anything that wasn't within your perceived role. I think there is much more kind of acknowledgement that everybody's different within just normal management styles. It's much less command and control than it used to be. But I don't know the answer to that. I think that's too hard, Sarah.
Too hard?
Yeah.
Oh. It's a challenge we can put out there to anybody listening and watching. All things being equal, and the boundaries set aside, what would you like to see change across our system in the next 4 or 5 years?
I would like to see implementation of all the great policy and legislation that we have, and not more reinvention or re-strategizing or let's rip it up and start again. Can we just do the things that we have set out to do, and can we focus in doing that on the people that we're doing it for and their communities rather than the organisations? So it's that kind of We need to stop thinking about we're the health service, we're the council, we're the charity, we're the whatever, and think about what's best for those people there, whether it's an individual, a family, or a community, or a country, and do what we need to do, shape ourselves to meet their needs. That's what I would like to see.
That's a great note to finish on. Anna Fowlie, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.